Architects, past president of the chapter, current member, and one of the producers of this show, hoping to come out to Los Angeles. We've been really fortunate to have the exhibit designer, curator Sekou Cook, stand next to me, help us bring this whole show out here. And we've been doing programs all summer long since we opened in June here on lots of different topics. So we're really excited to have this show this evening. Let's say we talk about that more in a second, but I did want to just give you guys a couple of kind of housekeeping or data points, which is tomorrow night is actually the closing reception of the show. The show opened back in June on the 24th, and Sunday the 17th will be the final day of the show. So we're going to do our big closing reception tomorrow, starting at 3 p.m. with a little symposium featuring Sekou, a number of the architects that are included in the show. After that, at 5 p.m., there's going to be an auction. So a lot of the artwork that you see on display here in the gallery will be available to bid on. If you want to take something home, you'll have that opportunity. It's going to be all measured online, so there'll be kind of QR codes if you want to come back tomorrow and check that out. If you want to go onto the Helms Bakery District website or the A+D Museum website, there's also links to the auction bidding site as well too. You can see all of the work that's available. So hopefully you guys will see something that you want to take home with you. That'd be great. And then after that, we'll have a closing reception. It's again open to the public and free, so you guys are all welcome to come back and join us again tomorrow night as well too. We're gonna do a little bit of celebration and have some fun and all that stuff in here as well. So hopefully I will see many of you guys tomorrow. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Sekou to talk a little bit about the show and our graffiti artist feature tonight.
Thanks, Lance. Thanks everyone for coming out. My name is Sekou Cook. I'm an architect. I'm currently in Charlotte, North Carolina. This show is the reflection of about maybe 8 or 9 years of research work that I've been doing. The first iteration of the show started in 2018 in New York City, and it's been to 5 cities since then. This is the 5th iteration over 5 years. There's been a book that's been produced along the way called Hip Hop Architecture, and this is the last stop on the journey. So you all are very lucky to be here at this moment. Even luckier if you come out tomorrow night and bid on some of these pieces. Those will all go to support some of the ongoing nonprofit work that my studio is doing. Not all the pieces will be for auction. Some of the pieces in glass are first edition original pieces that will be going back to the original artist. Most of the other work is prints, so definitely check out some of the things that you like. Some of the models as well will be up for auction, so if you want to take some of that stuff home with you, check out the online auction wherever you can find the links. When this show started in 2018 at the Center for Architecture in New York City, in one of our public events, I met Carlos Rodriguez, who goes by Mayor 139. He's a legend in the world of graffiti from back in the old subway days in the early 70s and 80s in New York City. And I've been lucky enough to found a friendship with him. And every time I go to a different city, we want to have the local graffiti artists that put all the work on the walls. In New York, we were lucky to have Chino. In St. Paul, we're lucky to have my boy James Garrett and his boy Shock and Roger Cummins do the work on that wall. In Charlotte, we had Skoll do the work there. And then in Atlanta, we had, I'm forgetting now, who was that? Okay, don't record it. Yeah, so, but this time I asked Carlos who he would suggest for LA, and then he put me in touch with Prime, and I realized at that moment that he was the progenitor of this LA wild style that is so iconic for this area and so perfect for this West Coast swing of the show. And you can see what he was able to achieve on the walls here, elevating the show to a whole new level. And and making sure that it was representative not just of the show and the background, the backdrop of what graffiti means to hip hop architecture, but also making it iconic for the West Coast and for LA. And without further ado, I'll introduce Prime and the other icon, Man One, and Scott Powers will take over with all the interviews. So thanks again for being here.
How's everybody tonight? All right. Woo! You made it out on a Friday night. This is an accident waiting. All right. You made it out on a Friday night in LA traffic. Give yourselves a hand. And by the way, let's give a hand to Zoku and Lance and the SoCal NOMA and A&D Museum and the bakery. I mean, everyone, give them a hand. This show is amazing. I am honored to be hosting or moderating this panel with these two OG legends in the LA graffiti art scene. My name is Scott Power. I'm the co-founder of Crew S Studio. We're a production company that specializes in arts programming. I'm also the creator and founder of NotRealArt.com and the host of the podcast Not Real Art. So it's my honor to be able to sit down with these artists, because one of my greatest joys in life is to honor artists and help them tell their stories and promote their lives and their artwork. And so the honor's all mine. So without further ado, right? You want to hear me anymore, right? I'll shut up, and we're going to talk to these legends. Let me sit down here. Prime Man One. Yo. Wow, great to have you guys here. So Prime, why do you think you got famous? Yeah.
Speak louder. Plastering my name around the neighborhood. You know what? I think most of the time, we have to say that it was due to.
Why don't we switch the mics?
Hello?
Yeah, perfect, good. All right, yeah, people might have missed that, so start from the top.
Yeah. Hello, yeah. I guess why do I think I got most famous? Really just writing, I guess, in the neighborhoods. You see the tags on the walls and some, sometimes in a recent interview, someone asked me the same question, and I really couldn't, be more of a loss and how to say that I got famous to that. I don't really even feel that.
Right. Well, the humility of an artist shines through. But my guess is you're famous because you got up more than most, and your style was distinctive and trailblazing. And I appreciate the humility. Man One, what do you have to say about Prime? You're an OG LA writer, the junior compared to Prime, I think. What was your experience of Prime?
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks for everyone coming out. I didn't realize so many artists were going to be here, old friends, people I hadn't seen in a long time, and brand new people, so thanks again for coming out. One thing I didn't know was that we were both born the same year. And the reason I didn't know that, or it didn't even dawn on me, was because when I was growing up, I grew up in Alhambra, so the east side, San Gabriel Valley. And when I first got into graffiti, was all writers from that area. And the ones we looked up to in that area was K2S, STN crews. And Prime is, one of the main members from those crews. And so I had already seen this stuff up, when we used to go to drive by on the 10 at the Brooklyn Yard and the Panic Zone, all these spots. And so I just always assumed he was like 10 years older than me, And really it wasn't until just recently that I found out how are we the same age? Like, he must have started writing when he was like 5 years old, because, you know, I started when I was like 16, 17, so. He was
You're a
already-
late bloomer.
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah, he was doing it before, so, but I guess to the question initially was just, the way that Prime and especially that whole, you know, K2S STN crews, the way they painted back then, it blew our minds because it wasn't gangster, it wasn't like hip hop graffiti, but it was somewhere in between, and it was something different. And it was big and colorful and bold, and so yeah, we just always looked up to them. So it was just like, you know, years later to be able to meet, you know, Prime and all these other artists was like, wow, it's amazing, you know.
So the name of this exhibition, this incredible exhibition, is Hip Hop Architecture. I want to sort of start at the beginning a little bit and just do a little level setting and hear from each of you guys. What does hip hop mean to you?
What does hip hop mean to me? I guess freedom, more of a freedom of expression, a new era. Mostly the freedom of expressing yourself.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I would say the same thing, but I would also say that, you know, when I was growing up, especially like in the mid-'80s, when hip-hop started coming to LA, because back then, by the way, we didn't call it hip-hop. We had breakdance music, and we had, you know, different kinds of things, rap, and there was breakdance music, and so hip-hop came later, like the term. We didn't know it as that in LA. But, you know, for me, it's important because, I mean, if it wasn't for hip-hop, I would have never got my name, you know. I got my name because one day I was on a bus and some kid was tagging on the bus, and I asked him what he's doing, and he's like, just graffiti here, gave me the marker, and said, put something up, just don't put your real name. And I was listening to Mantronics, which is a group from New York, on my Sony Walkman, and I started writing Mantronics, and that was the first time I did any tagging, and it stuck, and I just wanted to do that all day long, and so I was like, let's do it on the streets, and so I found friends to show me how to do it on the streets. But when I got to the streets, I realized Mantronics was way too long. I'd probably get arrested by the time I got to the X. So I just cut it down to Man. So Man 1 has always been my name like that. But if it wasn't for hip hop, I wouldn't even have my name, you know. But for me, you know, there's always this debate, like, is graffiti part of hip hop? Is it one of the elements or
It's
whatever?
one of the four pillars, is it not?
Well, sure, that's what people say, but in LA, graffiti's been around way longer. You know what I'm saying? So there's been graffiti in LA. You know, I don't know what do you say, since the 40s.
Well, let's be clear, right? I mean, to the extent graffiti is about writing on walls, I mean, that goes back to the caveman. That goes back to the caveman.
Yeah, but that style, that's LA right there.
Yeah.
That's not, you can't find that in New York or
Right.
Philly or in the caves of France.
Right.
This is LA. So
And you looked.
I looked.
Well, so Prime, how did you get your name?
I actually just took it from the spray can. I was about 11 years old, so I didn't know what I was doing. I just took the R off it, and sounded good to me. It's the truth. I didn't really learn that, you know, they use it for prime time, and, you know, prime colors and all this, and I was like, wow, it suits me fine.
Good name, Prime.
Yeah.
That's right. So what do you guys, when you think about hip hop and hip hop culture, and you think about the perception of it, obviously, you know, you grew up hip hop, you know, hip hop is core to your culture, your identity. What do you think most people misunderstand about hip hop?
How many Latinos are part of hip hop? People look at it as black culture, which it definitely is. Obviously, it's not going to debate that. But being a Latino Chicano from LA, I identified with all of rap music and stuff, and I didn't see color. I didn't see, you know, I didn't care if it was Public Enemy or KRS-One or you know, NWA. I loved it, but there was so many of us in LA who just we didn't care. We were Latinos and we were into hip hop, like hardcore. And when you're looking back at the history, you realize that in New York, a lot of the people who started trailblazing, especially even graffiti and stuff like that, were a lot of Puerto Rican, Latinos, and so that part gets left out a lot about hip hop. And even with the music, they try to do like, oh, there's Latin hip hop, or it's not like that. You know, there's like 2 people you can name that are like Latin, hip hop or whatever. But Latinos have always been in the mix, and so that's the one thing that I think is always missing.
Right. So this amazing, inspiring show, Hip Hop Architecture, I would love to hear from each of you what this show means to you, and what do you think the value of this show is?
Excuse me. This show to me at least means that it's expanding hip hop or the arts. It gave me a new insight on something that I didn't really had encountered about with hip hop or architecture, yes, but not the 2 things sort of coming together. I think it opens new doors for possibilities that are endless. I mean, mine was a simple job. There was some lyrics, but when I saw some of the sculptures and some of the ideas and some of the photographs, I mean, it looked really. I mean, that gave me more ideas, for different projects on my own. But I think it's important for people to it's with the whole thing of expansion of this era.
Well, man, so graffiti artists have a unique relationship to architecture, right? I mean, buildings, walls, Talk a little bit about the connection or the relationship that graffiti artists have with the urban landscape, with the architecture, with the buildings.
Yeah, well, as a graffiti artist, I think when we're driving around, we see space differently than most people. We're looking at places where, like, oh man, if I put my name up there, they can't reach it, it'll stay up. Or, this is a cool spot if I run across the freeway and jump the fence. Or, we think differently, I think. That's why so many graffiti artists have gone on to be art directors and working as creatives, obviously as architects and other things, because we just see the world and the environment differently. Number one, because as a graffiti artist, it's not like street art where you're in your studio working and then you go paste it on the wall. It's like you learn on the street. Like you learn from someone else, they teach you how to do it, and you practice on the street, and you have to know how to navigate it and what time of the night or the day to show up. And there's a lot of things you gotta understand about the streets. And so buildings obviously is the number one thing. I'm really happy that in this show is Delta and Zeds, because to me they were like the first graffiti artists that I used to look at internationally, who were doing, just way different stuff than most graffiti artists. Other than just painting on a wall or making a wall look different, they were all actually building, environments and using their letter forms to create buildings and spaces. So, I think they were at the forefront, in my opinion, from graffiti artists that were entering the architecture's, zone.
So in terms of the public perception of graffiti art and graffiti artists over the last 30, 40 years, obviously it's changed a lot. I feel like on some level, public consciousness and public appreciation for the art form has definitely changed, right? Talk a little bit about, as graffiti artists, what you think people misunderstand about graffiti art and how their understanding of graffiti art has evolved over the last 30, 40 years, as you've experienced it as a writer.
I think it's really gotten a lot more attention as an art form. Sometimes you might get some of the graffiti mixed up with other, there's gang graffiti or hip hop East Coast graffiti. They both think, people think that they're the same, and they're not the same. Two different messages. In the last years, I mean, I think it's made a giant leap of movement that a lot of people are so much interested in it that I really appreciate it. We all appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because the legitimacy factor, right, seems to have, increased exponentially. I mean, but yet on the other hand, it's interesting because now it's a felony, right? I mean, back in the day, it was a misdemeanor or something, right? So it's changed and evolved in really interesting ways, for good and bad. Man, talk a little bit about, your feelings about how people appreciate or don't graffiti art.
Well, like I said earlier, I started when I was around 16 or 17, and I can remember with my friends, I mean, just out the gate, I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I wasn't even good at it yet, but I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to paint, I want to do graffiti, and get paid. And all my friends, some of them sitting back there, would say like, nah, no one's gonna pay you to do graffiti. Who's gonna buy graffiti? And I was like, I don't know, but someone will, I think. Not all our friends are gonna be artists. We might have a friend who's a lawyer, maybe he'll buy it, So I just figured like there was a future. I don't know why, but I thought, maybe by the time I'm 20 years old, I can make it as an artist. Well, I'm 52 right now. So it took a little longer, but one of the things was that, like, for example, I started, Crew S Gallery in 2002, and that was the first, like, full-time graffiti gallery in LA. Because what needed to happen is we needed to educate people about the art form. Because it wasn't good enough just to show them, well, look at how talented these guys are, Because there was always this thing like, well, it just belongs in the streets. It doesn't belong in galleries or museums. And during the 90s, when I was trying to get into museums and galleries, that was the first thing they told me. It was like, oh, it's cool, but you do graffiti. That just belongs on the street. So it took a whole education of tons of people coming through, not just to my gallery, but also places around the world where people were getting educated. Authors who wrote books like Steve.
Shout out Steve Grody,
Graffiti
right here in the
LA.
front row.
So it's all about education and really showing people like what's really in there in this art form. Like, it's not just a superficial thing. It's not just some vandal kid who decided to just go say fuck the world. It's like there's more to it than that. And so that's what it took. It took just constant education and evolution. Then you have 2011, Mocha does art in the streets, and then you're like, okay, well, I guess we're done. so I closed the gallery the next year because I was like, there's nothing else to prove. So, but it just takes that like long-term dedication and education to teach people like what graffiti is really about,
Right. Well, okay, so as true blue Angelinos born and raised, you've seen the city change and develop in so many ways. And as graffiti writers, you have a unique relationship to the streets and to the buildings and to the landscape. Talk a little bit about, just to show his hip hop architecture, talk a little bit about how the city has changed in your eyes for good, bad, and different. How have developers, made life better or worse for not just the Angelinos, but maybe graffiti artists too? And talk about the evolution and the change you've seen over the last 50 years living there and growing up in LA.
A lot of the things that I've seen for the good. I mean, like in downtown Los Angeles, I mean they've restored some of the old theaters. Those are nice to visit. I mean, it's not like the same as it was, maybe 20 years ago or something. It was a lot more rugged. As far as the mass camps, I mean, yeah, there's a nowadays we're not so much painting outside of the building, but our paintings are inside the actual buildings that were commissioned by some of these companies to, for artwork.
Case in point, the room we're in.
Right.
So that's fascinating, right? So that gets the legitimacy and the commercialization, right, of the art form from what was maybe once considered just pure vandalism by people who didn't know better, all the way to maybe some people that might would have called it vandalism 50 years ago are now paying good money to hire you guys to make your work inside their buildings. Man, talk a little bit about your experience with LA and how you've seen it evolve and your feelings about the developers and the development going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, born and raised in LA, you have a nostalgia of the era that you loved, which for me was the late 80s, early 90s, and it looks nothing like that anymore. Even though that was a very violent time, being a young person at that time, there was a lot of stuff going on, but there was also a lot of experimentation with the art form and a lot of new things happening. So it was a really exciting time. Now what I see is, for example, the arts district, right? Artists can't really afford to live there anymore. So there's a whole shift in communities and where people move, and Highland Park didn't look like this back in the day. Certain areas just so different. But along with that, sometimes comes good things. For example, I think the fact that so many new developers are hiring graffiti artists and street artists and muralists to do the outside of buildings, not just in East LA, not just in Boyle Heights, but now it's citywide. And I've been commissioned a number of times by developers to put up just straight graffiti pieces on a building, and to me that's amazing. It's we've gone, because when I first started out of college and trying to make a living doing this, it was a skill. So I was like, oh, you know how to spray paint, that's cool, but can you spray paint there's palm trees and a beach, and obviously, in your 20s, you just need to make money, you do it. But now it's like, no, don't do palm trees and a beach, do what you do. And that's amazing, because that's as an artist, that's where you want to get to, where people love you for what you do, not to replicate something else. Because I guess we've had stuff happen where someone hires me, and then I would do a design, and then they would say, that's cool, but it's too graffiti. I always love that. I'm like, why are you hiring me then? Hire someone who doesn't do graffiti. But now they actually want graffiti, this wasn't possible, It's just amazing how the shift has happened in people's minds with what art is and what it can be, I remember so many of the talks we were at before where we were on stage and it was, graffiti, is it art or is it vandalism? And then it was me and a cop and after the third one, I was like, I'm not doing these anymore because they're pointless, So there's no cop here tonight that I know of, but not on stage at least, so that's good.
Well, so this is really about kind of the private sector and the private sector's relationship with the art form. Let's talk a little bit about the public sector. Let's talk about the city of LA, the Department of Cultural Affairs. Let's talk about how the city has or hasn't embraced graffiti art as public art, or worked with graffiti artists in a legitimate way, and what kind of love or hate have you felt from the city?
The city has embraced this a lot. Actually, I don't know if they still have a vandalism as a felony. I think it's a lower charge now. I'm not sure. I think,
let's find out for sure before we.
For sure, I've seen that some of the officers. They're not paying that much of harassment towards young kids wanting to paint on the streets or just having fun with graffiti or murals. officers themselves have come by and just have assisted some of this, and just having everything go safe and smooth. It's, I mean, I've seen also different programs they've offered, and they are more open to even using spray paint. Before it was, if you use like the spray paint, it was, you weren't gonna get nowhere. You had to pick up a brush or something, and I was sort of against. I don't know.
Well, as I understand it, in the 70s, the city of LA was the mural capital of the world. And, obviously there was a lot of evolution with that, good and bad. And at one point, I think you were involved with the city in terms of creating the ordinance for the mural program. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that has played out, and did it solve the problem that it sought to resolve?
Yeah, well, for those who don't know, there was a mural moratorium from 2002 until 2012. So for 10 years, it was illegal to paint murals in LA. People were still painting them, but if one person complained, the city would come and remove it. And a bunch of all our murals got destroyed during those 10 years. So around that time, 2011 and 12, we started doing with the city, with Tanner Blackman, who headed it up and kind of like decided to let's figure this problem out. And so a bunch of galleries and artists and community activists got together, and we figured out a solution, basically come up with a mural permitting process for the city of LA that they adopted in 2013, I believe, or 2014, something like that. And so what happened is it created a kind of a renaissance at that time, because all of a sudden everyone was like, oh, it's no longer illegal. So then everyone started painting everything, but they didn't go through the mural permit process. So it was just this idea now that we're not going to get buffed and painted over. Unfortunately, that program it still exists, and you still have to apply for permits for murals and stuff like that. But most people just don't take advantage of it. And obviously, having fought so hard for it, I was doing all my murals that way, because also one of the positive sides of pulling a permit to do a mural was that the city would then be responsible for maintaining it, which wasn't a thing before. So if something got tagged, you could call 311 and then tell them where the location is. They say, okay, you have a permit on file. We'll go out there and clean it up. In theory, that was great, but in practice, that's not what's been happening. For a number of reasons, obviously we had this pandemic. One of my murals in downtown, which is permitted, kept getting tagged over, obviously during all the riots and everything, and the city never cleaned it up, always had excuses why they didn't clean it up, and finally the building owner just decided to paint over it, because it was just destroyed. So there's a pro and con, love and hate with the city. I work a lot with Department of Cultural Affairs. I've been on their boards, and I help them find artists and give public art projects to people. I've been given art projects by them, so it's a good thing. But it's so understaffed and so underfunded that that I think that needs to be done a little bit better, and maybe there needs to be some way of injecting more money and into public art for the city of LA. A city this huge shouldn't have a problem having a bank account that can fund tons of projects.
Right. So years ago, I was having a Guinness in an Irish pub in Chicago, and the woman next to me, who was an artist in Chicago, we started talking, and that neighborhood, this was like 95, that neighborhood was starting to see, here's the G word for the first time tonight, gentrification. And so we started talking about gentrification, and she said to me, I was a young buck, maybe 22, 23 at the time, And she said, well, you know how gentrification happens, don't you? And I said, well, maybe, but you tell me. And she said, well, the way it happens is there's always this blighted area of town that no one wants to live in. The crime rates are high, but there are big affordable spaces that artists can afford to live in, and they move into this blighted area. They set up their studios, they start making amazing art. There's a cool gallery that pops up, an underground club, a coffee shop, and a vintage store. And before you know it, 2, 3, 4 years, that's the hip, cool area of town, and then the money follows, and then eventually the artists have to flee because they can't afford to live there anymore. Now that was the sort of, I think, unformulaic approach to maybe the way gentrification used to happen. Now it feels like gentrification is like formulaic, like they just have a formula and they know, like, bring in artists, bring in galleries, let's put in some murals, and then that's how the system or that process of gentrification often begins. Talk a little bit, guys, specifically about your feelings around gentrification, the good, bad, and the ugly.
Well, yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because especially now, because the formula exists, people reach out to artists all the time to paint murals and come up with interiors or whatever, bring a gallery in and all that stuff. So as an artist, you want to do it and you want to get paid and you want to make a living. But then the flip side is the rents are going to go up. Who's going to be able to afford this? It's usually, black and brown people who are kicked out of those neighborhoods. So you have to think, you don't have to, but I do, think about, okay, well, if I'm going to work with these people, what can I put into place, or what can I contribute, So a lot of times, the way I work is when I'm brought in on a project like that I think is on the cusp of being gentrified, I like to bring in community. And a lot of my murals are about working with community. So like right now I'm doing a mural project. The old Jordan Downs in Watts, I was the developer there, put out a call and I got the project maybe like 2019, but then obviously because of the pandemic, nothing happened until like last year. And I've been painting murals. In what they're calling it Cedar Grove now, to take away the stigma of the Jordan Downs housing. And so I decided to do murals, all of portraits of residents. And so rather than just do my own work and bring it in or whatever, I decided to have meetings with people. So it started last year. I did about 5 or 6 meetings in the community and met with people and kids and every age group that was living there, photographed them and all that. And this whole year, that's all I've been doing is just going down there and painting murals of these people. And it's been incredible because the developer now called me. I just was there last week, they were interviewing me, because now the developer decided that this is gonna be something they do in all of their future projects, And so I think that just goes to the point that, like, at the end of the day, it's people that matter, It's the communities that matter. It's not the building, it's not the Starbucks or the Nike store or whatever. It's the people. And so when you put the reflection of the people on the walls, you should, every day, there's only maybe 30 walls that I'm painting, and I have hundreds of photos of people. And every day I'm painting, someone comes up, how can I get I want my face on the mural, or I want my kid in the mural. Like, give me more walls, But it just shows you that when people see themselves on the wall and they see themselves reflected, it matters, And so I think, good for this developer, Bridge Housing is their name, by the way. I'll give them props. Because a lot of times the developers, they come at me or at artists like the last thing, like, we're already done with the building, we just need some nice, cool little stuff here because, the Starbucks is gonna open and we need something that looks cool. So I think that's what I try to do when it comes to gentrification. Is you're not gonna stop money. You know, you're gonna lose all the time against money. But what will always win is community. And so, and we've seen it in Boyle Heights. It's happened. And so there's places where you can fight back in certain ways, but I think it's just about, you know, trying to be as open with the actual community that lives there as possible.
Talk about what happened in Boyle Heights.
Well, in Boyle Heights, exactly what you mentioned was all the big galleries started opening up in Boyle Heights, bringing in, you know, a lot of collectors, big money, big shows. But there was nothing happening for the community. They weren't helping in any ways. People's, obviously, their, you know, rents were going up, people were getting evicted, and so Boyle Heights, a lot of the people just got together and were like, we're not gonna stand for this. They started protesting a lot of galleries, and you know, sometimes they kind of go overboard. I mean, they protested self-help graphics, which is crazy. Okay, that's a pass, but you know, like people like self-help graphics, for example, if you don't know, I mean, they're instrumental in lifting up the voice of Latinos and other people in that area. So sometimes it's misguided, but the overall effect was that people stood up and fought and made noise, and you know, there's still buildings there and there's still things, and a lot of galleries left and all this other stuff, but also a lot of opportunities opened up for community members. So, but unfortunately, like, you have to have that kind of coalition and drive to protect the neighborhood, and it doesn't always happen.
Sounds like the moral of the story is, if you're, for the developers out there, who's a developer? The moral of the story is, sounds like it's better to go ground up versus top down, right? Yeah. So that was an example of best practice and worst practice. Prime, talk a little bit about your experience working with developers.
My experience with developers, for the most part, I'm trying to usually get myself some sort of space. It can be more community, based, using something for the youth in those neighborhoods. Actually, Man One is here more involved in the community than I am. But some of these developers, they're not worried about any of that, about any of the.
Right. Bit of an afterthought, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
My experience has just been, fair, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Do you feel like, because what I'm hearing is, and this is, I think, kind of what the show's about as well, really, is like, feels like so many of these developers maybe are kind of simplistic when it comes to working with artists. It's like, oh, I need something pretty on the wall. So it's like putting, or something interesting, something cool on the wall. So let's paint the wall two-dimensional, But when you think about how graffiti, the aesthetics of graffiti might inform three-dimensional space and shape and form and function, what do you think the opportunities are for developers to work with graffiti artists specifically and artists more generally? And you walk the show and you see, all these amazing ideas, but it's this exploration of how the 2D informs the 3D. So talk a little bit about, when you walked through the show, and how you saw graffiti art informing the design and informing the concept.
In this show, the designs that I saw were very, out of this world in a way.
Yeah.
Didn't, like some of the sculptures back there, it looks like a giant
Graffiti
what is
piece
it,
or something,
graffiti piece,
right? Right.
That was really interesting for me. Some of it taken a house and sort of divided it into different sections, and it was something really new to me. Not something that I so much had thought in about. The other things that was really interesting was thinking of like sort of ideas for my own art. You know, I don't. Necessarily think of it as like something I'm gonna be explaining to somebody or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, man.
Well, actually, it reminded me that I think the first time that we showed together was in 1994 at MoCA. There was a show called Urban Revisions, and that was the first time graffiti was at MoCA in this context. And what happened is it was a show about architecture and urban planning and urban design. And this group that I work with called Adobe LA, artists and designers on the border age of LA, went to MoCA and it said, why are you guys doing a show that's about the future of LA and there's 0 Latino architects or urban planners showing, right? And so the curators were like, okay, well, what do you guys want to do? We'll give you an area. And they were like, no, we don't want an area, we're going to do an intervention. And so they said, okay. So we got artists like Prime and Tem, to rest in peace, who just passed away, Angst, myself, Bile, Nerve, K4P, bunch of artists. And we all went in there and we painted the walls. And some stuff like this, right? But other big murals and things like that. So we just went in and decided where we were going to paint and do our art. I think 3 architects left the show in protest. So that shows you where we've come, right? Because we were at a time when they didn't see us as working hand in hand with them. And we had to come in and just kind of like graffiti artists do, is just, I'm going to do that, and just show up and do it. And so this conversation has been, evolving. It wasn't always like this. Architects weren't always open to what we're doing, and urban planners weren't thinking about including us in our own city. So it took graffiti artists to be like, no, you're gonna stop and listen and pay attention and include us. So yeah, I think it's just thank goodness we're at a place, I think, where people are more open to it now.
Got it. Well, thanks, guys. Well, I bet who has questions for Man One and Prime? Yeah? Let's open it up, guys, because I know that the audience is itching to talk to you guys. Please, what's your question?
Could you talk a little bit more about what is written on these walls?
What's written on the walls? Basically lyrics from Tribe Called Quest and Wu-Tang. That's all they are. They were given to me.
Well, so you were directed to paint lyrics from them, or that was your own decision? Just curious.
No, they're different.
Got it. Well, it's an exhibition. Exhibit. Any other questions? Oh, come on. Oh, yes.
I would just like to add a little bit about a recent project, and I think it's if you could talk about your project in Nepal, which I think is really the crowning glory in terms of where have we come, how far have we gotten? It's amazing.
Thanks, Sharon. So last year I was invited by the U.S. Embassy in Nepal to go and do a 2-week street art graffiti, intervention, painting, murals, workshops, lectures. It was amazing because when I got the call, Nepal wasn't even on my radar. That was the place to go and do what I do. So we were invited. I went out there for 2 weeks, and it was amazing meeting all these local artists, getting to see how diverse Nepal actually is. I knew so little about it. I was in Kathmandu for the most of it, although we did go to a couple other cities. But seeing the way they look at street art and graffiti is incredible because they have. When I got there, I seen all these walls, painted in the script, and so I just thought they were street artists and whatever. And they were like, no, that's all like propaganda. It's just like city propaganda. Like when something happens, the city goes out there and they hire an artist to do all the lettering. And I was like, oh man, well, let's go over it, because the whole idea was like, they wanted to learn how to protest, how to say stuff out there, So one of the murals that we did is we got together with, I don't know, like 10 or 12 local artists, and we painted like a 120-foot long wall. And I remember I did the whole theme of the mural was unity. Sorry, it was the unity, and I did unity, in their language with their script, but done in graffiti style. And people came up to me and they were like, "Oh, that's so cool that one of the local artists did the thing, and then you just filled it in." And I was like, "No, I did the whole thing." And they were like, "Wow, you could do that with our language? Like, you could do graffiti in our language?" And I was like, "Yeah, why not?" So it's amazing that we're just, that last year, so 2022, these people in this part of the world are finally opening up to the fact that you could do something different with typography and with words and letters. And this is something that I've been practicing since 1987. So there's still places to learn and progress and share. Because the people I met there were, and then I learned so much from them. The different types of art forms from the different parts of the country was just amazing. So yeah, that was like a really unique, once in a lifetime experience, but who would have thought, running around in the middle of the streets, painting graffiti in LA would land you in Nepal, working with the U.S. Embassy.
On the U.S. taxpayer dollars, so you're welcome. Okay, so one more question. Yes, sir. Or two more. Oh, two more. Three more, maybe. Come on. Yes.
So this question is in regards to the style of the lettering here on the walls. Prime or man, if you can explain why is this distinct for LA as opposed to the East Coast graffiti?
Well, to begin with, some of this writing you would see it mainly on the east side of Los Angeles. And it's mainly used for gang activities. It's normal to just see maybe a roll call of names and then a larger emphasized lettering that depict their gang, or sometimes crews, but anything but that specifically is just mostly for gangs. I see it very different from the East Coast graffiti. Of course, I think certain people may from New York are actually more attracted to it than that they are from some of the East Coast graffiti that they see. One lady named Marsha Reed from the Getty Research Institute. She one time invited us up there to show us some of the books that they had from like the 1400s and 1500s and stuff like that. And she was asking me, I have like a whole group of scholars here that can how can I say translate in different languages and writings that they see, but none of them can actually tell me what this is. She was showing me a picture of a corner liquor store or something, and I don't really know how to tell her. What it really was. I try to explain more in a simple way, a polite way of saying that. Well, those are warning shots that certain people are letting other people know where they're standing. She said, "Oh wow!" And that's the stuff that I see in your book that me and my friend of mine, Big Sleeps, had done. And she goes, we'd like for you to work on a project with us, and that's how actually the Getty project started with the man one and I myself were a part of. I think today that I'm of course not using it for any of those things anymore or anything like that. But it's certainly been my stepping stone into the arts. I think it's opened my eyes regardless to how and what it is and what it was used for.
Thanks, Prime. There was another question? Yes.
Yeah, this question is for Prime. So, from looking at your journey as a graffiti artist.
This question is for Prime. So in looking at your journey and reflecting on it as a graffiti artist and how far you've come, when you started, what you've been through, kind of taking yourself through your own journey, can you talk about how you approach your art now?
I think I'm always developing that, how I approach my art now. Recently, I've been working with different materials as far as paper, different papers from Japan or France and stuff. Maybe sometimes even making my own from scrap papers that I collect. I'm in a different stage almost every other summer or something. One summer I'm doing one thing, and the next I'm just like a kid that starts drawing and wants to draw Superman, now wants to draw Snoopy or something. I'm constantly sort of evolving in that sense that I want to experience that and give it my own little twist.
So, Brian, just to clarify a little bit, so would you characterize that as an intentional change, or you just go with the flow?
I'll go most with the flow.
Let's go with the flow. All right, let's go. There was a question.
Something that's different that I see that's interesting, or sometimes crossing one thing with another, and by trial and error, see something that's interesting to me, and I try to develop that more.
Right on. Yes, there was a question right there, sir.
Thank you for, first of all, thank you for expressing yourself and telling your story here today. And this exhibit has really been great. My question is, it relates to where we go from here. Because again, you mentioned a few minutes ago about sharing, and these are great stories that need to be told. How do we move forward in terms of really being able to incorporate that in the hardscape of our communities?
I mean, well, I think that's a great question, and that's what we need to answer. And I think in each of our practices, we do it in our own ways. For me, I'm very much involved in murals and muralism. Although I do showing museums and galleries and all that. If I could just do one thing, it would be murals. Because I think that's how you are able to talk to the most people. I've done murals where I painted it, and then 2 years later, I get a random email from someone saying, thank you for helping me go through this problem I was having with my father. And I saw your mural, and it changed my. And I was like, that's crazy, but that's the power of art, and also. Because it's free, because it's on the street, because it's accessible, we're able to communicate. So this whole conversation we've been having about architecture, about urban design and planners and architects and everything, I think is an important one because the more the art is out there, the more that people can see it, right? The one thing about graffiti is that it didn't start in the museums, just another place where we can show our stuff. It's not the ultimate goal. It's not the, that's not the end all be all. It's just another place for us as graffiti artists, So I guess to your question, it's just the more we do it, the more we put it out there, people are going to see it and react, and hopefully our stories will, will be told that way, So we'll see where it goes.
Yes, question in the back. Wonder.